Chapter 8. The Incomplete Union. An exquisite welcome was waiting the return of the procession and the royal bride at the palace of the city of Surishila. Madhavi was welcomed in a traditional way with the most significant ceremonies that are usually held on the same day of the wedding. She was then taken to the glowingly decorated room of Prince Roshan, which was fervently embellished with the best jasmine and rose flowers. Madhavi, who had been deadening the most of the ceremonies and happenings till then, was now a bit carefree. She tried to tranquil her peculiar emotions. She delicately sat on the floral bed and relaxed only for a moment. Just then, Prince Roshan appeared beside the doors, showcasing the expression of an uncertainty. Madhavi immediately got up and looked at him in wonderment if there had to be some other formality still left, awaiting her presence again. Prince abruptly approached the bed and sat taking deep breaths as if he wasn't either well or was feeling sick or tired. Madhavi, out of her vital concern, finally broke her silence, shedding all her hitch of being newly bride. "I hope you are fine. Is there anything that is troubling you?" She paused. "Maybe I can help," she urged many times, but in vain. Roshan's unreasonable silence laid Madhavi in an imperative incredulity. She couldn't resist continuing her questioning. "Please, let me know what is wrong." She spoke in a bit determined voice this time. Roshan at this second juncture divulged his silence in flimsy, meek voice and asked Madhavi to take rest. "I'll be all right after some time. You please take rest. Must have been the same tiring day for you." He spoke in such incoherent words that uttering a single word seems a massive hurdle for him. And then he instantly lay in the bed with his body curled up tight in cushions. Madhavi couldn't infer the implication for such an occurrence. He might be tired, she eventually thought in order to tame her perplexed mind, but it kept straying off to recent occurrences where Roshan, her so-called partner, had behaved so inexplicably. She sat by the window and looked at the moon. It was bright and fully developed. The night was breezy as restful winds blew across, encompassing tiny objects in its drapery flow. She was terribly exhausted. Consequently, as she rested her head on her folded arms placed on the window sill, it didn't take long for her to doze off instantly. It was probably the wee hours of the night when she split up from her deep sleep, possibly because of a slight skid from the windowsill. She felt something was lying near her on the floor, so she looked back over her shoulder to see what was afoot. To her utter shock, it was Prince Roshan, quivering and wriggling on the floor like a moth, spiraling in towards the burning candle and ending up drawn into the flame. His eyes were wide open, and lips hung out with overstating breaths. His face was pale as rain-washed rose. He kept swallowing and his throat kept clenching, and sluggishly his eyes went blank. Madhavi stood traumatized. Her eyes and mouth were frozen wide open, thunderstruck by such an unforeseen phenomena. In an attempt to flee from the shock of fear, she ran out to call for help. The maids on duty outside her chamber approached quickly to her calls. One of them ran to inform Balakrishna and Vajraveer about the awful incident. King Vajraveer instantly ordered to call the Rajvaidya, the physician, immediately. Rajvaidya was a skilled physician. He had been looking after the prince ever since his illness was traced. Emerging from the state of shock, Madhavi was now curious to know the details of prevalence precipitated in anxiety, snuffle and commotion. After everyone left, except Queen Balakrishna, who was still sitting by her son's side, Madhavi patiently waited for her to get up and catch her glance. Balakrishna got up after a while and looked at Madhavi. She was in genuine guilt as well as concern for Madhavi to have been testified with such an awful experience on her first night in her new abode. But before she could utter a single word of comfort to Madhavi, Madhavi asked her, what was the matter with the prince? Leaving Balakrishna in an embarrassing chaos. Balakrishna replied, I feel sorry for you, child, but you knew this could have happened any point of time. Her voice sank in fear. Right? She further mumbled to herself, the effect of dose might be over. What could have happened any point of time? I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Please explain. Is there anything presumed by you which I am unaware of? Madhavi was literally taken aback by such claim of Balakrishna. Balakrishna stood dumbfounded at her reaction. Her mind tried to untangle the puzzle of web weaved by her own fairy friend, Prabhavati. Drops of sweat covered her burnished forehead and tears rolled down her cheeks as she began to unfurl the strings of veiled truth. Balakrishna finally admitted, Prabhavati sent me a written message where she had informed me that she had discussed all facts about Prince's sickness of getting untimely fits with you and your parents, though in person, secret from other family members. In her message, she also asked me to write a letter to King Bhaldev from King Vajravir about Roshan's unconditional liking for you, which of course was a white lie. She scooped her forehead in her hands. She sounded strong-minded to reveal all associating facts. This, I assumed, was perhaps to win over the king's complete confidence in order to ignore any prior meeting between the families before your marriage. Tears of guilt and shame rolled down her cheeks. Along with her written scroll, I received a pack of some inebriating herb, consumption of what stimulated Prince's action to help us control ill-timed fragility for a day in order to help to transmit all matrimonial liturgies effortlessly. Balakrishna paused for a moment as she sobbed heavily and then continued. In all these nasty consequences, we have been so mean that we gambled blindly on the happiness of an innocent girl, and I fully realize that perhaps your stepmother Prabhavati was also just trying at being a responsible friend in attempt of tying friendly knot between the two great kingdoms. All I can at this point ask for is your forgiveness. She sobbed and sobbed. Tears streamed down in a disheveled heap as her grief and regret. Madhavi was in stern rage now after having heard of this selfish plot against her and her parents by two unkind and ungenerous friends. How could a girl of great honor accept such tawdry tricks played against her and her innocent people? That means we have been cheated. This is so highly immoral, she declared. She had firmly decided to leave Surishila and go back to her own kingdom the very next morning, as well as had an earnest desire to see Queen Prabhavati in order to understand from her that what in the whole world bound her to think more of her friend than her filial girl. Stepdaughter though, she had undoubtedly always loved her like her own mother. She ultimately voiced her decision to Balakrishna. I must leave with the first ray of the dawn to confess the truth to my parents. Madhavi's unyielding words put Balakrishna's heart beat on a break a while. She could hardly think of any other resolution at this unbinding situation than pleading to Madhavi. She fell on the floor with the drape of her sari open wide in both of her hands and earnestly started to beg to Madhavi. I ask you no more than to stay, O noble princess, and let the things be covered from all till Prince recovers his health, which I am sure he will. Else it may result in a devastating war between the two mighty kingdoms that have just tied into a cordial bond. I was compelled by the destiny to be so vile, but the great sages have pronounced a prophecy that Roshan would recover at the earliest from his ailment after his marriage, and now in the moment which has bestowed on us after a long wait in form of your grace. Please don't leave my princess, I beg of you. Madhavi felt conned out into hundreds of pieces at this queer situation of Balakrishna's intense and heartfelt pleading. She could feel the blood running through her veins. Her palms were perspiring and her eardrums resounded the thumping of her heartbeats as her nerves sank in the icy depths. She was not only the combination of grace and valor, but also a woman of real inner beauty with a compassionate heart. So it reflected as she raised Balakrishna up to her face and spoke the kindest word in great empathy for her. I will stay, for you, for my dear mother and loving father, for the honor of two supreme kingdoms of Surishila and Satvahana, for the dignity of our families, and for everything that is essential for maintaining peace and harmony between the two dynasties. But she paused and then said, but not for your son. Balakrishna's watery eyes spread open while Madhavi looked deep into them and continued without a heavy breath, till he really knows me as his better half. However, I would abide by all the obligations and duties requisite for a wife for the fettle and well-being of her husband. From that moment till today, Madhavi has just been carrying out all her duties of a good daughter-in-law and a loyal wife who actually, for the crucial fact, luxuriates in none of these relations. Vishnukarma pronounced, heaving a deep, painful sigh. She is a wise woman of high morals and values in the true reflection from her daily practice of reading the Holy Gita. On Chief Priest Rajshri Vallabhacharya's suggestions, she has to perform the rituals of taking a spiritual bath under the falls of Kaveri river on every bright full moon's day of Krishna Paksh, the harvest moon. And this was one of those days of her performing such ceremonies when perhaps you woke up to an endearing call. But Vishnukarma hushed and looked at Rudra in his sincere empathy for him. Then he softly said, destiny gets out of control if we let it to be. Then one has to abide by its decisive laws, accept its rules, and pursue its proceedings, no matter what it plans and how it settles later for him and her.